25 years ago, I created CounterStrike. But what was I playing when it all began? My name is Minh Lee, and this is my playback. In 1983, the very first game I ever played was Space Invaders. Space Invaders was really what started my love for gaming. I did get a chance to go out and play at the arcades, and back then we were playing mostly games like Pac-Man and Space Invaders and 1942. Arcades were kind of like the cutting edge of gaming technology, so I was always very excited to visit the arcades and just trying to check out which new games were available. Space Invaders was a game where you controlled a little spaceship and you would shoot at these aliens that would kind of come down in waves. I guess back then there wasn't really much else to compare it to, but it was very fun for me. So it was my father who was really into computer technologies, so he would always buy the latest consoles such as the VIC-20 and the Commodore 64, and eventually the Amiga when it came out. So his love of computer technology is what kind of opened me up to video games. I was playing games like Rambo, 1942. The Rambo game was actually kind of like a top-down shooting game. You would just move around in the jungle, controlling him from a top-down perspective. It was just really exciting just to be able to play that character because it kind of really immersed me into that world of Rambo, where you would just kind of shoot the enemies and pick up some power-ups. So I think as a kid, that's kind of what drew me to that genre of game. I did play a lot of games that kind of centered around the Vietnam War, and I was pretty young at the time. I think I was 11, so I didn't really have a full understanding of the war. And all I knew is that my parents, they fled Vietnam because of the war. You would shoot at the Vietnamese bad guys. And I remember playing that, enjoying that quite immensely, not really understanding the fact I was shooting my own brethren, but to me as a kid, I just kind of enjoyed the shooting part of it. In 1994, I was playing games like Wolfenstein and Doom. Wolfenstein was the very first FPS game, and at the time there was really nothing else out there quite like it. It was the very first game to introduce the perspective of playing the game from a first person. It was so new and novel that as soon as it was released, it really attracted a huge audience of gamers because this was never been done before. And I think as soon as that game was released, the industry kind of shifted and we saw this flood of FPS games being developed because of that and because of what people saw was so incredible, so immersive. So Wolfenstein was that game that really started the FPS genre. As soon as I played the very first FPS, I knew that this was the genre that I wanted to spend most of my play time on. In 1994, when the Doom editor was released, the developers, ID Software, they were the very first game developers to create modding tools that allowed amateurs like myself to actually dive in and just experiment with what it took to actually create games. You would basically create levels from a top-down perspective. You would just kind of define the walls and kind of define where the enemies would spawn and where the players would kind of where the player would start. Prior to that, I was just a gamer and I loved playing games, so I never really fully understood what it took to actually make a game. I kind of realized, well, this is not impossible. I could actually become better at this. And so after I made my very first level in Doom, I was addicted. I just started making more levels. If it wasn't for the Doom SDK, I don't think I would have started this whole journey. In 1998, I played a game called Rainbow Six, and this game really influenced me in making CounterStrike. Rainbow Six was a game that focused on counterterrorism. You played as this elite unit of counterterrorists, and you had to kind of strategize. It was kind of a mix of FPS and strategy. So Rainbow Six was definitely the very first tactical shooter, and it really kind of started the whole genre. One of the things that I really enjoyed about it was it allowed me to play with my friends cooperatively, and it really encouraged us to play strategically and kind of move throughout the missions in a very tactical manner. It was a game that made me feel very immersed, and it just made me feel like an actual special forces operator, and I think that was really why I enjoyed it so much. When I created CounterStrike, I never really envisioned that it would become as big as it has today. And so it was really quite a shock to me to still see the game being played 25 years later. I think one of the things that made it so successful was it came out at a time where there was no other game quite like it. I took a lot of what I experienced from Rainbow Six and I applied it to CounterStrike, and I kind of wanted to make it a bit more faster paced, but I still wanted to keep the whole tactical kind of teamwork element of Rainbow Six. and kind of make sure that that was the foundation for what CounterStrike was to be. It would take the best bits of all of these games that I enjoyed playing and just kind of combine them into one singular game. And so that was really my motivation for creating CounterStrike. About a year after I released the initial version of CounterStrike, the creators of Half-Life, which CounterStrike was a mod of, they approached me. They expressed interest in picking up CounterStrike in an official capacity. There was really no hesitation on my part. It was just the opportunity to work with Valve. So basically, I went from a university student with like a huge student loan to working for my dream company, Valve Software, and it was a huge turning point for my career. In 2006, I started working on this project called Tactical Intervention, and the whole idea of TI was basically I wanted to capture a lot of the elements that I already established in CounterStrike, but I wanted to introduce some newer elements that I felt were kind of missing. I wanted to work on a project that wasn't kind of handcuffed to an existing game. Around this time, I was playing a game called Rainbow Six Vegas, and this game had a lot of interesting mechanics that I wanted to incorporate into Tactical Intervention. So they had a really cool mechanic for rappelling. Rappelling was basically where the player would attach a rope to the top of a building, and basically he would climb down the side of a building with a rope attached to it. This concept was quite interesting to me because it hasn't been done properly in games before. So I felt that Rainbow Six Vegas did a pretty good job of doing that, and so I wanted to kind of take that feature and kind of stick it into Tactical Intervention because I felt that it would introduce a whole new dynamic to the gameplay. It also had a lot of other cool mechanics, such as breaching doors with explosive charges, and so I kind of borrowed that feature as well. So I was heavily influenced by a lot of the things that Rainbow Six Vegas was doing. As the game was kind of coming near towards completion, I was starting to become disillusioned with the game. So when it failed, I kind of accepted it quite quickly, and I was able to move on to the next stage of my career and then just kind of look ahead and just kind of say, well, from here on out, I can work on something that's more promising. So after finishing TI, I wanted to get back to playing games. I stumbled upon a game called Dying Light. One of the things that really enthralled me about Dying Light was just how immersive it was and how it made you feel like you were really in the world, and it had a lot of really cool features. Like it had a really very fluid movement system where it allowed the player to parkour and climb the buildings very seamlessly, and when I was doing that, it felt so natural and it really made me feel like I was in the character. And so I really enjoyed Dying Light. So in 2013, I was approached by a colleague of mine who actually I worked with on TI. So his name is Marino Berry, and he created a game called Rust. He approached me because he was a big fan of my work. He really loved how I animated weapons, and so he wanted me to animate the weapons for Rust. So Rust is basically an open world survivalist game. It's a game where you start with nothing and you have to like explore this island and just gather resources and build a base and just develop your base and build tools. One of the interesting things about Rust is you never really know what to expect, and it's such an unexpected experience every time you play the game. Game Rust itself was such an enjoyable project because, well, partly because it was so successful, and so we had a huge player base, and just working on a game that was so popular, it really motivated myself to really try to create the best work that I could. DayZ was a really interesting game in that it was very similar to Rust in that you started out very weak and you had to build your character up, and that every time you replay the game, it was always kind of a new experience, and that's what really made it so interesting for myself and all the other people that played DayZ. And so I think that's kind of the elements that I felt we wanted to kind of incorporate into Rust, was that whole aspect of growing your character from such a weak starting point into something so strong. In 2023, I kind of came upon a group of former developers who worked on the Rainbow Six series. They were working on this co-op shooter. Basically, it took a lot of the the ideas from PayDay. I think one of the things that I enjoyed about PayDay was I liked how the missions, when it started, it would start off quite easy, and then towards the end of the mission, the action would get incredibly intense. But basically, they kind of wanted to allow the player to play as the good guys. One of the key differences with Alpha Response is our game is kind of set in kind of an open world, and the firefights are much more dynamic and very unpredictable. And so I really enjoy that part of Alpha Response. For the past 20 years, I've always been playing shooters mostly. I don't know what it is about shooters. I guess maybe it's just the sense of immersion that I get when I play first-person games. I kind of see myself playing FPS games for the next 20 years until something else comes along. But yeah, it's just something about FPS games that really attract me. The question always rings in my head, why do I keep doing this? Do I still have that passion? And oddly enough, I do. As long as I'm playing games and experiencing different types of genres, I'm always gonna have the motivation to create new games based on my experiences. Speaking of game ideas that I wanna create in the future, there is this one idea that I've always had. So I'm a big fan of martial arts movies. I was a huge fan of Bruce Lee movies. So I've always wanted to make a game that would kind of combine martial arts, but from a first-person perspective, which hasn't really been done before, because we have games like Street Fighter, we have games like Tekken. I mean, all of these games are great, but nobody's ever really done a good martial arts game from first-person perspective. And I think there's so many challenges involved in doing that, but I think my dream project would be to make a martial arts game that could feel really good from a first-person perspective. And I think that's my next game if I had the resources to make that.